Is the BYU basketball program on the verge of adding a quote-unquote cannon to their already impressive arsenal? Sure looks that way. We're talking about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and a big thank you for all of you for tuning in. All right, let's dive right in on today's show. If you were members of our Locked On Cougars Insider group, we also alluded to it a little bit on our Twitter feed, Locked On Cougars. You can search out both of those. We alluded to it last night that it appears that BYU is working their way towards adding another top 40 recruit to their recruiting class by the way of adding Kanon Catchings to BYU's already impressive roster under Kevin Young. What does Catchings offer to BYU? Well, as I mentioned, he's already a top 40 prospect, another just eye-catching talent that BYU could add to an already impressive team that is going to, I think, absolutely surprise some folks. I know that there's a lot of unknowns with this squad, especially considering you add guys the caliber of Kanon Catchings when he takes up the 12th of what is expected to be 13 scholarships and 13 roster slots. Where are the minutes going to go for all of these guys? Well, that's a great debate to be had, and that will come in time, obviously, for Kevin Young and his staff to determine who the starters are going to be, who the rotation is going to be, how deep that rotation might look. There's a lot of questions to be answered on that front, but they are in what they like to call asset accumulation mode right now, and in the college world, that is bringing in the best talent you possibly can find, and according to people I talked to last night, BYU is coming very, very close to adding Kanon Catchings to their roster. Does that mean it's a done deal? Let me be very clear. It does not mean it's a done deal. A lot of things can change, but the people I talked to last night are trustworthy. They know what they're talking about. I know in theory who they're talking to about this, and it leads me to believe the BYU thinks it's more of a matter of when, not if, Kanon Catchings joins the BYU basketball program. The best thing I love about a guy like Catchings, he's got very, very good positional size. Something that Kevin Young highlighted during his media availability last week. He talked about the fact that he wanted to see guys who could shoot, but also had positional versatility and size to add to his roster. Well, that's exactly what Kanon Catchings brings to the table. He's 6'9". He's currently $185 or $190 weight-wise, depending on where you look. So probably could be due to add some weight to that frame. But his ability to play appears to between the 2, the 3, and most likely the 4 spot is where BYU is going to utilize him. I think he would tandem very nicely with Brody Kozlowski and Mawot Mag as your theoretical foremen to lead BYU at that stretch 4 position. And then you have guys like Fousseyni Traore and Keba Keita holding down the middle for BYU as they try and go more positionless than anything else. The way that Kevin Young has assembled this roster is he wants to have the versatility to be able to invert his roster when need be and really shake it up. Could BYU have a starting lineup of, let's say, Dallin Hall at 6'4", Egor Demin at 6'9" at the 2 guard, Elijah Crawford out there at some point with those two. Then you add the Richie Saunders, who's a 6'6" guy. You add Fousseyni Traore to the mix. You add Kanon Catchings. The thing about this is BYU's guard line or their backcourt could be taller than the front line, but that does not mean that BYU is going to be any less effective, because the whole idea is you're forcing other teams to match up against you versus you having to match up against them. Sure, you're going to have to deal with some defensive deficiencies, I think, especially size-wise, when it comes to maybe having a guy like Keba Keita being your biggest 5-man at the current time. Now, there's still a scholarship out there that BYU could utilize. Could they add a big body there to add some size? Maybe so. But I think the bigger thing is that Kevin Young is intent on forcing other teams to adapt to playing against BYU rather than BYU having to adapt to playing against them. That's easier said than done, obviously, in the Big 12 because it's the best basketball conference in the country. I think all of us with our own eyes who are Cougar fans or otherwise saw what happened last year. And the funny thing about it is the metrics, and I'm not alone in saying this. I know Mitch Harper's been talking about it. Robin McCombs has mentioned it, etc. The Big 12 was down by its own lofty standards last year. That's the incredible part about that. And this year, it appears that it is beefed up even more so. There is a theory out there that the Big 12, with now 16 teams in it and adding the likes of Arizona to the mix, and Arizona State, who's recruited very, very well, could this league be 12 tournament caliber teams deep this year? That's what it appears it could be. But I think BYU is absolutely in the mix, and adding a guy of the caliber of Kanon Catchings to the mix, it only makes this roster that much stronger, that much deeper, and that much more talented as Kevin Young leads BYU into their second year of the Big 12, his first year as BYU men's basketball head coach. He is doing an incredible job, speaking of Coach Young. I'm also going to give a tip of the cap to his staff. The big connection for Kanon Catchings is Tim Fanning. Coached him last year with Overtime Elite, that prep league that is out there. Tim Fanning coached him, and when Kanon Catchings withdrew his name, or didn't withdraw his name, he requested his release from his national letter of intent with the Purdue Boilermakers. Tim Fanning was probably on the phone with him immediately saying, "Hey, I'm working here at BYU. Why don't you come check us out and join us here?" I'm not saying it's a done deal, but once again, it feels like it's all but there. And that, I think, would just add another piece to an already impressive puzzle for Kevin Young. It's a good problem to have if you're Kevin Young right now, with the amount of talent that he has accumulated on this roster for BYU. And the incredible part is he's not done yet, because he still has one more scholarship to utilize, and who knows what he does with maybe a couple other walk-on potential opportunities. It's incredible to think of what he could accomplish year one of his tenure at BYU. He could send a guy like Egor Demin, who we'll talk about here in a little bit further, send him to the NBA draft next year and really begin using the whole hashtag PROVO. It's PRO in capitals with a lowercase VO. That's what they want this to be. They want this to turn into an NBA factory. They want to be a place where top-level talent in the country is going to be willing to come to Provo, play for Kevin Young, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4 years, and essentially launch them off into their professional careers. That's why Kevin Young has offered A.J. DeBonsa, the top recruit in the 2026 class. He's offering the best talent he can possibly find out there, with the whole thought that I can prove myself in getting these guys to the next level. That starts this year. If Kanon Catchings, Jagor Denham, Elijah Crawford, any of these young bucks coming in, Brody Kozlowski, etc., come in and blow up, I think Denham is the most likely to be a one and done candidate for BYU. If that proves to be the case, if Kevin Young absolutely can get people to the NBA from BYU, it's only going to make this snowball that's already rolling very nicely down the hill in terms of picking up speed and just adding size and mass. And the whole analogy of a snowball rolling down a hill goes. It's only going to get better and faster and that much bolder for BYU going forward. And that's a very positive thing if you're the Cougars. Now, it does, based on everything we keep hearing about BYU basketball, it does add the question, something that Jay Drew from the Deseret News posited in the Deseret News on Monday: is BYU becoming a basketball school? We'll delve into that as we roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at eBay. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive, my friends. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for with eBay Guaranteed Fit. Your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply, and eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. We get started once again today at ebaymotors.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also available on the Amazon Fire TV channels app in their free Fire TV channels section. It's called Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league as well. Find Locked On Sports Today available wherever you get your podcasts, also on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app as well. All right. So Jay Drew wrote a really, really good piece, and Jay is a dear friend. I consider him a friend. Obviously, we've worked together for some time. I've been in the media game for over a decade at this point. Jay Drew's got 3 times that on me. He's got 3 decades plus, and he's an absolute bastion when it comes to covering BYU in particular. He's done it for quite a while now, and wrote a really, really interesting piece for the Deseret News. It's simply put, is BYU becoming a basketball school? He does lay out the reasons why Kevin Young and what he has accomplished with BYU basketball may cause Cougar fans to essentially take a higher interest in basketball, because the belief is with the talent accumulation that Kevin Young is already showing he can do. We already talked about Kanon Catchings potentially joining an already strong roster for BYU. There is some thought that could he lead BYU to a Final Four, the first time BYU would have ever accomplished that in all their basketball history, before the BYU football program, which has really carried the banner for the last 50 plus years for BYU sports, makes the college football playoff. I think it's a valid argument to be had here because, once again, it's all about talent. And think about it. You have 13 scholarships in basketball, and a guy of Kevin Young's standing, he is tapping into every resource he's got. He has got coaches he's known from his years in the NBA and also the G League that are fanned out literally across the globe. He knows scouts from multiple organizations who fan out over the globe and trying to find the best talent possible. And I'm sure he's tapping into all those resources to find the best talent he can find. Filling 13 scholarships with top-tier talent is infinitely easier in the grand scheme of things than filling out 85 scholarships for Kalani, Sitake, and the BYU football program and find the top tier talent there. I'm not saying that BYU football is incapable of doing this, but it feels like it's a longer road for BYU football to get to the quote unquote mountaintop, in this case, a college football playoff berth, versus what I believe BYU basketball may have to accomplish to get to a Sweet 16 and Elite 8. I think the Final Four will be the comparable thing here, the college football playoff, even though the football playoff has now expanded to 12 teams. The bigger point to be made here is that would 1 year and really 2-ish plus months of recruiting for Kevin Young push BYU from being a quote unquote football school to being a basketball school? I will say no, because once again, BYU football still garners 63,000 and change at every home game, at least they did last year, as members of the Big 12. Whereas the Variant Center, when it's packed to the gills, what's it now? 18 and change, maybe less than that, maybe 17, high 17,000s with the new seating arrangements. So it's still 3 and 4 times the size of BYU fans showing up for BYU football. But the BYU basketball program, it is taking a lot of the luster and a lot of the headlines away from BYU football. Not that BYU football minds. Let me also add that. I think BYU football understands that they are going to be severe underdogs in most people's eyes this year. There's a very good and real possibility they're picked maybe at best 13th in the Big 12 when the 16-team preseason poll comes out at Big 12 Media Days next month. They could be 14, maybe 15. I don't think they'll be dead last. I think Houston's probably going to take up the final spot on that, maybe Arizona State. But BYU football is not going to be very much overlooked in the football realm. Whereas BYU basketball, the way that they're recruiting right now, if they're not mid-table at worst, I'd be stunned when it comes to their preseason poll coming up in October. But I think BYU football still overall leads the way when it comes to the lion's share of the news and the attention and everything else that comes with BYU athletics, because I can tell you, having done this podcast for going on near 6 years now. Remember, we've done this. We have 1,600 episodes, something like that. I can tell you there are Cougar fans literally worldwide. It is a global fan base, and they all come back to check in on Provo, Utah, and the BYU sports teams. Football still garners a massive, massive audience. But what BYU basketball is doing, and I'll shout out Bryce, one of our Locked On Cougars Insider members. He pointed out something. He said, Jake, it's absolutely incredible to consider that the gut punch we suffered. I might be misquoting Bryce here, but he said essentially the gut punch we suffered when Mark Pope moved on to Kentucky. I would have never thought that I would have such elation over BYU basketball after his departure. And I agree with what Bryce is saying there. What he is saying is that Mark Pope got his dream. He is going to be the head coach of the Kentucky Wildcats, the program he won a national title with, the job that he had angled for and he had been angling for his entire career. Probably got it a little bit earlier than anticipated, but he's living his dream now in Lexington, Kentucky. It's incredible to think that BYU went from Mark Pope, who was a very, very capable coach. Let me remind you, but went and added a guy like Kevin Young, who seems to have taken what Mark Pope accomplished and has elevated it to a whole nother 2 or 3 levels, it feels like, beyond what Mark Pope did. And once again, Mark Pope didn't do a bad job as BYU men's basketball coach. It was a win all the way around for all parties involved, the way this goes. A lot of times when a program like Kentucky plucks your coach away from you, you're not supposed to see your program essentially elevate itself like BYU basketball did. You're supposed to see them backslide and end up being more around where BYU football is expected to be in the Big 12. So I can understand why the argument is there that BYU basketball may be considered to be the up and coming sport, and it could take the headlines away from BYU football. But the other thing is, if BYU football goes out there and starts to win at a pretty incredible clip, and there was a really, really cool clip, I would encourage you guys to check out the Cover 3 podcast from CBS Sports. They had a really, really good question talking about if Kalani Sitake and Andy Reid switched places, how would they both fare? Speaking of Kalani as the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs and Andy Reid as the head coach of the BYU Cougars. And they essentially laid out that Kalani Sitake is doing about as well as one could really, in theory, hope for BYU football right now. Obviously, you want to see BYU football get back to winning at a higher level. 6-6, scraping to bowl eligibility. Yeah, that's not going to make BYU fans, I think, elated. But I think the understanding is that BYU football faces a little bit more of an uphill climb in the Big 12, simply due to the fact that the enormity of their roster is compared to what BYU basketball is doing here. Kevin Young is bringing in some elite talent. There's zero doubt on that front, and he's taking a ton of headlines, a lot of the spotlight away from BYU football this offseason. But once again, I don't think BYU football minds. They can work in the shadows and they can come out and surprise some folks and get back to the reputation they're known for if they can get back to playing the type of ball that they want to. In the meantime, yeah, Kevin Young and the BYU basketball program, let them have their time in the spotlight. I don't think Kalani Sitake even minds that one bit. Everything that I saw based on the short interaction they had at Kevin Young's introductory press conference, they were very complimentary of one another. They came over. Kevin Young made it a point to beeline straight to Kalani Sitake to talk to him and talk to him for a little bit longer than I think most people would have expected. I wasn't privy to the conversation. I was not sitting that close, but I was right there in the vicinity. And you could tell there were some very warm feelings and some well wishes exchanged between the two. Kalani loves nothing more than to be the head coach of BYU, of the BYU football program. But I think beyond that, Kalani overall is a BYU guy at heart. That's his pride and joy, is to be a representative of Brigham Young University. And if BYU basketball takes some of the headlines away from his program, I don't think he minds all that much, because once again, it takes, I think, some of the fervor and the passion and some of the negative comments that may come the way of the BYU football program. If the basketball program wasn't doing what they're doing, they'd be kind of just throwing extra time at BYU football. So no, I don't think BYU as a university is a quote unquote basketball school yet. Could it become that? Sure. But I think it would take longer than just one off season to make that happen. In fact, I think it would take like a decade. It really feels like, to make that happen. Maybe not. Maybe it wouldn't take that long, but I welcome your guys' feedback. Am I up in the night and saying that BYU is still a football school, but with a burgeoning basketball reputation? Or are they truly becoming a basketball school, whereas football is taking a little bit of a back seat? Let me know. Shout us out on social media. Let us know in the comments on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating and review. Leave your comment there. Always appreciate all the feedback, and I'm excited to see what you guys think of that. All right. Some of you were worried about it. I actually got a number of texts from our Locked On Cougars Insider group over the weekend about this very topic we're going to talk about as we round out today's show, sticking with the basketball theme. Jagor Denham has officially signed his national letter of intent with BYU and is signed with the BYU men's basketball program. What does it mean that he's officially in, and what is BYU? What do they do next? Well, apparently Kanon Catchings is next. We'll see what happens on that front, but we'll talk more about that as we roll on momentarily right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider group. It's a great way to interact with the show, supports the show as well. 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you. The best part about what we're doing is you're not having to go to a Discord channel or having to go to a website to get the updates. They're coming directly to your phone in the form of a text message. It does not get much more direct than that. You can sign up in the link on the show notes, whether it's on YouTube or if you're listening to this in the regular podcast feeds. There's a link there. Sign up, 14-day free trial, just $5 a month afterwards. And once again, the updates, my insider tidbits. I sent one out last night when I broke the news to our group about the Kanon Catchings situation. It comes to your phone in the form of a text message. It does not get much easier than that. The best part is you can fire back with text messages of your own. We have one-on-one chats and appreciate all the support you guys have already shown us. And hopefully many more of you will be joining us in the coming days and weeks. All right, let's finish off today's show and talk about Egor Demin officially signing with BYU. And I think this is, I can't reiterate how big of a signing this is for the BYU basketball program. If everything that he is cracked up to be as a potential top 10 pick in next year's NBA draft is true, his talent base alone has the possibility of lifting BYU to being a contender in the Big 12 Conference. I am not being facetious when I say that. I believe that he has got that type of talent, and the people that are around him believe he has that type of talent as well. That's why guys like Adrian Wojnarowski are breaking the news about this kid. That's the incredible part about this. Woj bombs are usually reserved for the biggest and brightest of the NBA. In the last 3 months, BYU has been the recipient of 2 major Woj bombs. Obviously, the first being Kevin Young being hired at BYU officially, and then Jagor Denham officially announcing his commitment to BYU, and as of yesterday, officially signing with the Cougars. 6'9", blessed with all the skills you would want to see in an NBA prospect. What is he capable of accomplishing in potentially as little as 1 year at BYU? Let me also reiterate one thing. Travis Hansen has kind of made the rounds on media, and he joined DJ and PK, the show I produce on a daily basis for the KSL Sports Zone in Salt Lake City, Utah. I think we were the first show to have him on after the Denham news broke. And he talked about the fact he was sitting in the room with Denham and Denham's parents when he met with Kevin Young. And he was absolutely floored with the way that Kevin Young laid out how they plan to utilize Denham's skill set, how they plan to develop and get him ready for the NBA. But he also added the fact that Denham is not necessarily planning on this being absolutely a one and done year. If he feels like he needs extra seasoning, he is more than willing to bide his time and get himself in the right position. Now, I would also say this to Denham and his family, that if he has even a scintilla of the type of season that any of us believe he can have this coming year, one and done is probably in his best interest. I'll be very clear about that. The NBA drafts on potential. Production is great. It's always great to have production, obviously. But they want young talent that they can project ahead and believe is going to become X, Y, and Z type players down the road. This year's NBA draft is considered to be one that's kind of blasé in most people's minds. Next year's NBA draft, of which Egor Demin is a part of, is expected to be one of the blockbuster drafts in most people's eyes. And we're talking about the Boozer kids, Carlos Boozer's twin sons. There is so much talent next year's draft. And the crazy part is Egor Demin is right there in the mix as a top 10 pick, in theory, of that group. That's how talented this young man is. And I am excited to finally see him take the court for BYU and show what he's capable of. He led Real Madrid to their, what do they call it, their minor league team. I don't know how to accurately describe it, to some really, really nice accomplishments this past year. And he's getting a pretty hefty penny from BYU NIL-wise. The reports are anywhere between $1.5 and $2 million, to buy him out of his contract with Real Madrid and also to get him to come to BYU. So BYU put up to get this kid to Provo. Now let's see what he's capable of doing to maybe shut up some of the haters out there as well when it comes to BYU hoops. But I frankly don't see a ton of haters on BYU basketball right now. I think the Cougars are set up for a pretty impressive season. I know that we haven't even seen them really take the court as a full squad yet. We haven't even gotten close to training camp and the start of the upcoming season. We don't even know what this full schedule is going to look like for BYU basketball yet. But the potential, the overall feeling, the fervor, I used that term earlier about BYU football. Well, there's a fervor and there's just a passion for BYU basketball that I think has been established just with what Kevin Young has accomplished so far as BYU head coach. And it's an exciting thing. I'm not going to tell anybody how to fan in this circumstance. It's an incredible thing that Kevin Young has accomplished in a short time as BYU basketball's head coach. And the talent that he has added, led by the aforementioned Egor Demin, it's an impressive group. But it feels like Denham, could he come in as an 18-year-old native of Moscow, Russia, by way of Real Madrid, and ended up in 6 months' time going from being a true freshman, first time in the United States in theory, to becoming BYU's best player in a generation? I'm talking about the last 10 or so years. There's a real possibility that it could be that. And that's an incredible notion to think about if you really step back and say, wow. But that's what we're looking at here. That's the type of talent that Jagor Denham is. So get ready, folks. The Denham season is here, and I am excited for it. I'm excited to be covering it. I never thought in a million years I'd be talking as much hoops as I have this offseason, but that's the crazy thing about this. It has been just headline after headline after headline for this BYU basketball program, and I'm loving it. It's a content creating machine. And you guys know that have asked me about this podcast. I crave any and all content I can garner this time of year. And if BYU basketball wants to keep delivering it, keep shoveling it, because I will absolutely eat it up and utilize it as well. All right, that's what we're going to leave off on today's show, and we'll wrap it up there. A big thank you to all of you for your support of the podcast. It truly means the world to me that you guys are around the world listening to this. I got to give a big shout out to Glenn over there in the Philippines. I know some of you out there in Hong Kong, New Zealand. We've got folks in the Middle East. I know our good friend Mojo, if he's out there. I know he's been a pilot in the sandbox, he likes to call it, out in the Middle East for the United States Air Force. But any and all support, even if you're in Saratoga Springs, Utah, watching this, I appreciate all of it. I cannot thank you guys enough for the support of this podcast. So thank you once again for making it your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you once again who are everydayers as well on the Locked On Podcast Network. And until tomorrow, my friends, have a great rest of your day. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.